how to use OBS Studio to record your screen. I'm not going to talk about games. I'm not going to talk about streaming. I'm talking mainly to those who want to use OBS to record their screen, maybe to make tutorials or record videos or whatever on your screen. Although all of the settings I'm going to talk about will apply to games and streaming as well, with a few different changes, such as making your bitrate even higher than what I'm going to suggest. So OBS is 100% free. You can download it right here for Windows, Mac, or Linux. Go ahead and download it, install it, and follow along. Now, don't confuse free with inferior. I actually prefer OBS to paid screen recording programs. So let's go ahead and start. The first time you open up OBS, let me go ahead and remove this. It will look something like this. You will probably have your auto configuration wizard come up, and you'll optimize it just for recording because we're focusing on people who want to make tutorials, for example. Go ahead and go through that. After you go through it, you're pretty much ready to start recording, but we need to add a scene and a source. You will probably already have a scene. Think of a scene as a collection of sources that you can quickly switch between. We'll look at scenes very quickly, but first we have to add a source. So right click or use the plus button here. And we want to capture the desktop. So display capture, pretty easy. Give it a name if you want, choose OK. Now, because I have two monitors connected to my computer, I can choose which one I want. We'll just select the one we're already on. And we want to capture the cursor. If you're recording a video, you may not want to capture the cursor, but we are making tutorials, for example. So we'll go ahead and capture that cursor, choose OK. And now you're technically ready to go ahead and start recording. To start recording, just choose start recording. That's all there is to it. And we are set up by default to record our desktop audio. As you can see, that's coming through right there. Okay. Now we need to look at other sources. So what if you want to add a webcam? Right click, and we'll go to a video capture device, hit OK. And then you'll just choose that source here. All I have is that one source, change whatever settings you want, OK. And now you have that right here that you can move around wherever you want. Resize it, rescale it, put it wherever you want. You can also lock it so you can't move it anymore. You can turn it on and off just by clicking the eye. Now in my case, if I want to capture the microphone from this webcam, I'd have to actually add that. So add audio input capture. And this is how you can add microphones like USB microphones, XLR microphones, 3.5mm microphones to your recordings. So you can, of course, narrate what you're doing. Come through here. And in my case, if I wanted the webcam, I would choose that here. If I want to choose perhaps a USB microphone, I would select my USB microphone. If I wanted to choose something that's plugged into my audio interface, such as a Complete Audio 6 with an XLR mic, I would select that. Okay. So let's choose, in this case, let's just choose a USB microphone. By the way, you can set up more than one microphone if you want. Okay, and that's all you have to do. Right down here is our microphone. You can see it's working just fine. Again, if I want two microphones, right click, add audio input capture, and add another one. But we have enough right now. We can also add another, say, display capture, because I have two monitors. So all I need to do is I can name that if I want, choose OK, select the other monitor there, which is for there. Choose OK, and then I could, of course, resize that, place it wherever I want. Now let's go ahead and look at scenes. We'll just turn this off for now, and that's off for now. Let's look at scenes. We already have one scene. I'll choose plus or right click and just add another scene. So of course we have to add sources to scenes. Now we already have our desktop audio coming through by default, because that's a setting that you can choose here in settings. We can come in here to audio, and you can come in here and set up defaults. For example, if you have a certain microphone that you always use and you don't want to have to set that up for each scene, you can set that up in here by default. All right. And then of course choose apply. But we already have that set up here. So we don't have any other sources, so I can right click and add whatever source we want. Another thing you can do is I could, for example, right click our display capture 2, and we'll just copy it, come over here, and I'll just paste that in, turn it on. So now I have my second monitor right there, and I can switch between these scenes just by clicking or by using hotkeys. So if I want maybe my video capture device, I'll just copy that, come to scene 2 and paste that in here. Go ahead and turn it on. And now I can switch between these two scenes on the fly. So that's a quick look at scenes. All right. Now keep in mind, my microphone is not in scene 2, so I would probably want to add that if I want to switch my scenes. Okay, so that's a look at sources and scenes. Now let's go ahead and get rid of this just so we don't get confused. We don't need it. And we'll just turn off everything we don't need. All right, this is fine. So that's the basics of how to set up sources and scenes and how to record using OBS Studio if you want to make tutorials on something like a media composer or something like a Pro Tools or maybe Excel or PowerPoint or whatever you want to show on your screen, you can do it with OBS completely for free. And that's how to set everything up. Now we probably need to head into settings here, which we will do. Let's come over here to settings. Now for most people, because we're not talking about streaming here, all you'll need to do is come to output, stay in simple mode, set up your recording path, which for me is right here. And these recordings are done in real time in our selected format. Okay, so as soon as you get done recording, that file will be available in the path that you choose. Okay, let's ignore this here for now, but just come down here into recording. So you can set your path here. All right, for recording quality, what I suggest is Indistinguishable Quality. This will adjust your bitrate on the fly and it will choose something that looks indistinguishable. We're going to look at what these quality settings actually look like, which is something a lot of tutorials out there on OBS fail to do. You're actually going to see the difference here, and there's not much. Okay. Now for recording format, I recommend either MP4 or MOV. Just realize if you choose MP4 and your computer crashes, you will lose everything that you have done. If, for example, you want to record in MKV, that's fine. You can always remux that to MP4 if you happen to need an MP4, simply by coming here to File and Remux Recordings, Browse, find the file, open it, and then remux it. That's all you have to do, and you can switch that to an MP4. This is already an MP4, so of course we won't do that. Let's head back into settings here and output. So for most people, stay here in simple and do either MP4 or MOV. Apply that there. For your encoder, I use my hardware encoder. You can use any encoder that you want. The software one works fine. I like using the hardware personally. All right. And that's pretty much what most people need to set up. And that's it. It's just this area right here. Other options you have for your recording quality is you could do same as stream if you want to use this number up here. We're going to look at setting our bitrate once we get into advanced, but you can set that here as well if you want to use our same as stream here in simple. And for recording tutorials, somewhere between 2,500 and 20,000 is usually more than enough. You don't need 50,000. You just don't need it. Okay. So same stuff applies here. I use my hardware encoder and you can set the audio bitrate. All right. But for the most part, indistinguishable is more than enough. What you don't want is lossless. Lossless will give you a gigantic AVI file, and AVI files are very hard to work with. And as you can see here, it can use upwards of 7 gigs in 1 minute, and you're not going to see any difference. That's the thing. You're not going to see any difference, which I will show you in just a minute. So now that we know our settings, this is basically what you want. So just pause the video, look at this. Again, your recording format could be MOV and it would look identical. And that may be what you want if you're going to import into, perhaps, you're going to import into a certain video editor. Okay. But this is what you want. After that, choose apply. Now realize if you record using simple, your video file will end up looking like this right here, meaning you'll have your video file. And then if we look at OBS here, we'll just hit it OK for now. We have a desktop audio source and a microphone source. So if we record in simple mode, we're going to get a video file, and then both of our audio sources will be in one audio track. If on the other hand, you want multiple audio tracks because you're going to edit that video later on and you need those sources separate, in that case, you would have to go into advanced, which we will in just a second. Okay, let's head back into OBS and go over more settings. Back to settings here. Here in general, you can choose your language and your theme. I'm on dark right now. And we can also go to stream, which we're not going to go into. Let's go over audio. You'll need to set up audio whether you're in simple or advanced. So my sample rate is 48. That's because that's what my computer playback is. We come in here, we can come in here to playback, and you can see that my speakers, right click here, go to properties, advanced, and right there it's on 48. Everything I have, in fact, is set to 48. Even my incoming microphones are set to 48. Properties, advanced, 48. If, however, everything is on 44.1, all right, in that case, you would come into OBS and you'd probably want to choose 44.1. However, 48K is the standard for video, so I always use 48K. For channels, you can choose between mono and 7.1. Most people will probably choose stereo. This is where we can set our default devices, so we just have this set on default, and that will use whatever our default is for our computer. All right, so in our case, we have it set to speakers right now. We could always change that. And then, of course, OBS will use whatever our default is. You can set up other defaults in here as well. You can also set up things like push to talk, push to mute in here. I'm not going to get into it. For video, just choose whatever your monitor is set to. For most people, that's going to be 1080. You can always come into your display settings and find that if you don't know. From there, if you need a different resolution than you recorded, you can downscale that to say perhaps 720 or something. You can set that up here. Most people, my guess is you're going to leave it on full HD, and you can have your downscale filter if you're using that, but we're not. For our frames per second, because we're talking about tutorials and not games, you will want 30. The truth is you can get by with 20 for tutorials. You don't need 60 frames per second for a tutorial. You can do it, just realize though it may make your file up to twice as large. And when it comes to tutorials, you're not going to see any difference, with the mouse moving around the screen at 60 frames per second versus 30. You're just not going to see any difference. Okay, so 30 is probably what you want. Play around with anything higher if you want. Then we have hotkeys, which I'm not going to go over, but you can set up your own hotkeys very simply here. Okay, so you can do things like switch scenes and whatnot with just hotkeys. Into advanced. So processor priority is normal, that's fine. You can change it around if you want. Renderer, just choose whatever you want. Doesn't really matter that much. For your color format, I use NV12. Honestly, you can choose any of these. It's not really going to make that much of a difference unless you need a certain, you need a certain format for whatever you're going into, which most people probably don't, and you don't even understand what I'm saying. So just leave it at NV12. You can do straight up RGB if you want though, okay? Now on to color space and color range. This gets very, very technical, so I'm not going to go into it very much. For our color space, more than likely you'll want 709 because we're going to do HD. So 709 is what I choose and probably what you should choose as well. For your color range, I always choose partial. You can do full if you want. Just realize that you might get a file that looks much darker than what you're actually seeing, and that's because of how computers remap your color space and your color range, whether it's 16 to 235, and that's going to get remapped down to 0 and 255 by your computer automatically. Whereas if you record full and it's actually already 0 to 255 and then that gets remapped, now everything is much darker and much lighter than it actually is than what you actually see on screen. Now we're going to see this in just a second. Just remember this setting here. Suffice to say, I use partial, but if I'm going into Media Composer, which is what I use to edit videos, it honestly doesn't matter. Okay, so if you like the look of full, there's nothing wrong with choosing it. But I always use partial because that actually gives me accurate colors. And in Media Composer, I can remap colors in half a second. It's not a big deal. Remember, whenever you change anything, to go ahead and choose apply. Now, let's actually come back to settings and output. And now let's go ahead and switch this from simple to advanced, because if you want to record multiple audio tracks, then we need to set this up here under the recording tab. So most of this is exactly the same type. Standard, that's fine. Again, we have our recording path. You can leave it on the default or change it to whatever you want. For our recording format, same thing applies to what I already said. Either MP4 or MOV is probably what you want, but you can choose any of these if you happen to need them. Now down to our audio tracks. As I mentioned, if we record in simple or in advanced with just one audio track, we're going to get a file that looks like this, with just that one audio track of a combination of our microphone and of our desktop sound. If I need 2 audio tracks or 3 or 4 or 5, however many sources I have, then I just come into advanced recording and I just check the tracks that I need. Okay, so maybe I want 3 different audio tracks. Very good. So we set that up. Now we'll go ahead and go through these settings here. For my encoder, again, I'm using the hardware. You can use the software. It's just fine as well. I'm not rescaling anything. Okay. Down to rate control, you'll probably want constant bitrate or CBR. You can do VBR or CQP. Again, what you don't want is lossless. All right, we'll just do CBR. That works pretty well for recording video. Now for your bitrate, again, same thing applies as I mentioned earlier. Anywhere between 2500 and 20,000 is usually more than enough for recording tutorial style videos. So 10,000 is actually a good range, and you're probably not going to see any difference anything above 10,000. For your preset, leave it on default. You just don't need that unless perhaps you're going straight up to YouTube and you may want to do something like a low latency. For your profile, I like to choose high, but main is also okay. For your level, leave this on auto. If you're doing 1080p, you can choose 4.1 or 4.2. If we're doing something larger than that, you may want to do 5 or 5.1. Okay, but for the most part, just leave it on auto and you'll be fine. Use 2-pass encoding, leave that on, and don't worry about these settings here. All that's fine. B-frames 2 and GPU 0, which means I only have 1 GPU. If I had 2 GPUs, I could change that to maybe 1, and that would change the GPU it's using. Okay, and from there, we want to make sure our audio is recorded at the highest bitrate possible. So just head to the audio, click this, and choose 320. We're all good there. Okay, so that's all of the settings. If you need to see them again, just go back through the video and go back through all of those settings and set it up just how I recommend, and I guarantee you will get very good video. And now we're going to show that next here. So once you set everything up, choose apply and OK. Now the last thing, if you want to capture multiple audio tracks, is you have to set that up within your mixer. So here we have desktop audio and audio input capture. So I choose my gear icon here, come down to advanced audio properties, and that gives us our advanced audio properties, of course. And now untick everything, and let's set our desktop audio to track 1, untick this here, and our audio input capture. In our case, this is a microphone, to track 2. If I had another microphone, I would set that to track 3. If I had another audio input source, like perhaps I have maybe Pro Tools coming in through ASIO, in that case, I would want to, of course, set that track to 3 or 4 or whatever it is. But in this case, we just have our desktop audio. So a YouTube video playing, an audio file playing, Spotify playing, whatever. And then we have our microphone. So those will be separate tracks now. Close that, go ahead and hit start recording. Of course, once you start recording, you would want to minimize, or you can come down to your tray and click that icon, and that hides it from our taskbar here. So no one knows what you're using there. Now, as you can see, whenever you start recording, here's that file right now that's being written as I speak, and just hit stop recording. There we go. And that's all there is to it. And there that file is. I can, of course, play it back. You can see with those settings that I selected, they are very high quality. Okay. And this is on, I believe we had it set to 10,000 because we're on advanced. And we can see what we actually hit here in details. And we can see we actually hit about 6. All right. So that's how you do that. And lastly, in our settings, if you want to add audio effects to perhaps your microphone or something, choose your gear icon, go to filters, and we'll go with plus, and I can add a compressor, gain, noise gate, noise suppression right here on our live input. I can also use VST2 plugins right on our live input. I'm not going to do it, but just be aware of that. And also, if you're going to edit your videos, you probably don't want to be putting a bunch of effects on audio going in, because you can always just edit that once you get it into into your video editor. Now, because we recorded, again here in advanced properties, because we recorded to 2 separate tracks, and remember we set that up here in settings, in output, in advanced, in recording, and we have our 2 tracks checked. Actually, we have 3 here. We would only need 2 in this case. We have that set up here. Then whenever you pull that file into your video editor, you would get a video that looks like this. Okay, so here you're going to end up having your desktop audio on this track here, and then down here is just your microphone. So now you can edit these individually. You know, if there's some sound in your microphone you don't want, you said something wrong, you can edit that without editing your desktop audio. Okay. Now, if you want to record ASIO audio, like your audio coming from Pro Tools, in that case, you would want to download a program called Voice Meter Banana, or use the FL Studio driver. You don't have to use FL Studio. Just download the trial and use the FL Studio driver in your DAW. All you do, of course, for Pro Tools is set up playback engine, and then come in here and you could select, for example, Voice Meter if you want to use that, or the FL Studio ASIO driver. And you set those up a little bit differently. I'm not going to get into that here because most people aren't going to be doing Pro Tools tutorials. You know, you're going to be doing Excel tutorials or Windows tutorials, so on and so forth. All right. I have different videos on this for a different channel. Okay, but that's all you need there. And of course, what you would want to do is, because you'd have 3 audio tracks coming in, you'd come back to settings, you'd come back to output, you'd come back to recording, and you'd choose 3. 1 would be desktop, 1 would be microphone, and 1 would be the ASIO. So that way everything would be recorded to separate tracks. You would apply it, you'd come back in here to your sources, you come to advanced audio properties, and of course you'd set that up properly in here. So that's all of your settings, and then you would end up getting a file that looks like this here, with our 3 different audio tracks. Okay. Now let's look at what these different settings actually do, so you can see why I suggest, say, a bitrate of 2500 to 20,000, and why I suggest most people simply come in here to settings, output, and just stay in simple mode, as long as you don't mind having your audio tracks integrated into one stereo track. So let's go ahead and look at that right now. Here's some files that I prepared earlier. And the thing you have to understand is the higher you go in quality, the larger your file is going to be. So here's high quality. Properties, you can see this is details 8 seconds long, and it's about 1200. Here's indistinguishable. Properties, details, this is about 1500, 12 seconds long. Okay, and it's 2.24 megabytes. Now here's a lossless file that we did in simple. This is 330 megabytes for 13 seconds. And this is over 200,000. I guarantee you're not going to see a difference between this 200,000 and this about 1,500. Now, if we come in here to say something that's set at 6,000, whenever we're using advanced and come here to properties, you see we actually hit around 4,000. Okay. Now, if we come into something that I recorded at 60,000, this is 44 megabytes, whereas our 6,000 was 6 megabytes. All right. So your file size is going to be much larger. Properties, details, and this actually hit around 31. You're not going to see any difference between, say, 10,000 and 60,000. You're just not. And if you want to see that, okay, let's go ahead and start going through these. I'll just grab all of them here and throw them into VLC. So we'll start with high quality here. High quality already looks good. It looks accurate, right? It looks great. But if we go to indistinguishable, I think it looks slightly better, slightly more crisp. So this is why I suggest you just choose indistinguishable quality in simple mode. Again, you'll have your audio files in just one stereo file. All right. Now this is lossless. Does it look any better? Especially look right up here. Now I'll go back to indistinguishable. Does this look any different between these two files? Lossless, indistinguishable. Lossless, indistinguishable. 330 megabytes versus about 2. Okay. I don't really see any difference. If you do, I mean, if you want to use lossless, I guess you can, but you really don't see any difference. So now let's go on to our 2500 bit rate that we did in advanced. Again, this looks good. What about 6,000? This looks a little bit better than 2500, I will admit that. So maybe somewhere between 4,000, which this actually hit about 4,000 for the bit rate. I say about 4,000 to 5,000 is usually more than enough. But if you want to come up here to 10,000, this is 10,000. There's nothing wrong with choosing 10,000 or 20,000 if you don't mind the larger file size. So 10,000 looks good. Here's 20,000. It looks basically exactly the same. Here's 60,000, which again, you're not seeing any difference. Here's 20,000. Here's 60,000. 20,000, 60,000. There's no difference there. All right. So that is why I tell you that most of the time you're going to be fine setting things on settings and output and simple and just choose indistinguishable. If you need to go to advanced because you want those separate audio tracks, okay. Recording, set that up, and about 10,000 is more than enough, as you could see. But if you want to do 20, that's fine as well. Now, see a couple more examples here. If we come, let me come back into my list here. So this file right here is 20,000, and this is recorded at partial. Remember that partial versus full that I talked about? So this is partial. And if we look at it here, let me move this out of the way. Let me pull up Media Composer. So what you're actually seeing here in Media Composer right now and what I'm seeing, and then we'll pull up the video. Now look at the colors. Let me actually move this back here. So look at the colors, the gray, colors here, the blacks and the whites, everything looks accurate, right? So this is partial and this is live. This is what I'm actually working with. That looks exact. Now, if I come to a full recording that was again done at 20,000, select that. Now, I'm not saying it looks bad, but it's much deeper and darker. If you like this, again, you can choose it, but let me move the video out of the way. If you look at the colors here, the colors are off. So the blacks are much blacker, the whites are much whiter. You can see how everything is much darker. So this is accurate here because this is what I'm actually seeing, and this is much darker. Again, it's okay if you like that, but it's not accurate. So this is our full setting. Again, if you forgot that, back into settings, come here to advanced, and that would be changing this to full. Okay. So that's why I usually use partial. All right. So that explains that. Now, what about 60 frames per second? So here's one done at partial at 20,000, 60 frames per second. Does it look any better? I don't see any difference because it doesn't really matter. So here's one at 20,000 at 30 frames per second. And again, it looks perfect at 30 frames per second. All right, so that is a look at why I tell you to actually choose those settings, because you don't need to record more data than you can actually see or use. There's no reason to record something at 200,000 bit rate when you're not going to see any difference above maybe 20,000 for a tutorial. In fact, if you're recording a video on screen, you can probably get away with, say, 1,000 to 4,000. Just depends on what's going on. Now for a game, because there's a ton of action going on, in that case, you may want 50,000 or 60,000 if your computer can handle it. But for a tutorial, you're making a tutorial about Media Composer, about Excel, about PowerPoint, about Pro Tools, whatever you're doing, you simply don't need 50,000. You can do it if you want. You know, I don't care about file size, so I might do 10,000 or 20,000 just because I don't really care about the file size because I have plenty of storage. You can do that, but you don't really need to. And especially if you're not going to edit your footage down, because even if I record something at 50,000 for the bitrate, guess what? By the time it gets uploaded to YouTube, I have that bitrate cut down to about 8,000 to 10,000, 16,000 max for the bitrate of an entire video with motion graphics in it. Okay. And that looks fine. Like the video you're watching now is probably was probably uploaded at around 8,000. And then YouTube probably took it down to probably 4 or 5, you know, and it still looks great. So that is why I tell you to choose these settings. Again, last time I'm going to say this. For most people, if you don't mind your audio being in one stereo file, so your microphone, your desktop audio, and anything else will all be in one stereo file, simply use Simple and choose Indistinguishable, choose MOV or MP4. Use any encoder that you want, choose Apply, OK, and start recording. That's all you have to do. All right. If you want those multiple audio tracks or you want more control, then come into Settings, Output, Advanced, Recording, and set up whatever audio tracks you want. Again, MP4 or MOV. CBR is probably what you want, and set your bitrate wherever you want. Somewhere probably between 2,500 and 20,000 is usually good. And then set the settings as I have here. Make sure your audio, of course, is at the highest it can be. Apply that, and you are good to go. Again, a quick look at the audio settings that I have there, the video settings I have there, and the advanced settings I have there. Again, pay close attention to either a partial or full. There's nothing wrong with full. Just again, realize you may end up with a video that ends up looking much darker than what you actually see. So that's why I choose partial and why I choose a 709 here. Actually, you won't see any difference between 601 or 709 in most cases. All right. So those are all the settings. Set it up like that. And that's also everything you need to know about setting up your advanced properties, about your filters, and about your scenes, and about your sources. So now you should know everything you need to know to go ahead and start making tutorials or recording your screen here with OBS Studio. Of course, you can adjust your bounds. I didn't mention that up top, but you can do that as well. And I already showed you how to set up different sources. All right, so you could set up, for example, a bunch of different webcams and have them all on one scene there, and then switch between different webcams by just switching your scene, you know, just for example. But we're not talking about live streaming a podcast here, which you can do with OBS. We're talking about just recording our screen. And don't worry about having to set up all these settings every single time. OBS will remember what you set up your last settings until you change something. So the next time you open it up, it will come up just the way you left it. Also, you can come up to profile. You can add new profiles and new scene collections as well and load them up at will. Just head over here to the site, which will be linked below, and you can download OBS Studio. And if you need to see those settings again, just start back at the beginning of this video and you will see everything you need to know. The ultimate tutorial for a beginner and for some intermediate as well. The ultimate tutorial about how to use OBS Studio and the best settings to use.